All right, let me start crafting this chilling story for you from the perspective of someone who finds themselves alone in a secluded, eerie farm. I was never one to believe in ghosts or hauntings, but after what happened last night, I can't go back to that farm. I had to leave everything behind. The tools, the truck, even my damn wallet. There's no way I'm stepping foot on that land again. It was supposed to be an easy night. The old farm I'd inherited had been left untouched for years, and with all the rumors about it being haunted, I figured nobody would mind me staying there to clear it up and sell off whatever was left. The farm was about 5 miles from the nearest town, isolated by woods that stretched into the kind of dark you only see out in the country. You couldn't even get a cell signal once you passed the last gas station, but I thought nothing of it. Quiet and alone. That was what I wanted. Or so I thought. The night started with this strange uneasiness that seemed to grow as the sun dipped below the tree line. I was hauling an old cabinet out of the barn when I first noticed it. This faint smell of rot, like something decaying nearby. The thing is, I'd been working around the place all day, and that smell hadn't been there before. But when I looked around, there was nothing. Just the empty fields and a creeping fog that seemed to rise from the ground out of nowhere, swallowing up the fence line in the distance. I ignored it, chalked it up to my nerves. But then, things started to happen. First, it was the sounds. While I was stacking up some old boxes in the barn, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming from the attic above. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing back and forth. My heart hammered as I looked up, listening. I knew for a fact I was the only one there. The attic was barely accessible, just a dusty crawl space that hadn't seen light in years. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up there, watching. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the rickety ladder that led to the attic. I half expected to see a raccoon or a family of bats, but when I shone the light around, there was nothing. Just dust swirling in the beam, the stale air thick and unmoving. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye in the corner of the room. A pile of old yellowed papers, crumpled and stuffed between the rafters, like someone had tried to hide them there. I grabbed one and scanned it. It was a newspaper clipping from 1967, talking about a string of mysterious deaths that had taken place on the property. The headline read, "Local farmer and family disappear without a trace." My blood ran cold as I flipped through the rest of the clippings. There were dozens, all documenting strange occurrences on the farm. People going missing, crops withering overnight, animals found mutilated in ways too gruesome to describe. It seemed like every decade or so, something terrible happened here, each incident more horrifying than the last. And then, I heard it. A soft shuffling sound behind me. I whipped around, flashlight trembling, expecting to see nothing. But there was a shape in the shadows. A figure. It stood just at the edge of the light, its outline barely visible. For a second, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Then it moved. My heart lodged in my throat as I stared at the shape, too terrified to move. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its limbs were long and twisted, like tree branches bending at impossible angles. The more I looked, the clearer it became, though the edges of it still seemed to blur, like it was both there and not there at the same time. And that smell, it was stronger now, a mix of rot and earth, like a grave that had been freshly dug. I stumbled backward, barely keeping my balance as I fumbled down the ladder. The thing didn't follow. It just stood there, its head cocked to the side, watching me as I backed away. But I didn't dare turn my back on it until I was out of the barn. Outside, I took in huge gulps of fresh air, trying to steady myself. I told myself it was just the dark playing tricks, that I was letting the old stories and creepy clippings get to me. But deep down, I knew better. The farm felt different now, like it was alive, and I was trespassing. The wind picked up, rustling through the tall grass, and I swear I heard voices whispering through it, words I couldn't quite make out, soft and low, like an urgent warning or a chant. I tried to shake it off and head back to the house, but then, as I crossed the yard, I noticed something else. The fog, which had been light and patchy, was thick now, swirling around the house like it was alive, wrapping itself around the windows and doors. I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me, but as I drew closer to the front porch, I realized something was wrong with the ground. The soil had turned wet, not just damp, but soaked, as though it had rained heavily, which it hadn't. I knelt down and touched it, and my fingers came away dark and sticky, smelling faintly of iron. Blood. The earth was wet with blood. I stumbled backward, my stomach churning as the metallic scent filled the air. I glanced at the farmhouse, and that's when I saw it. Through the upstairs window, something moved. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, staring up at the window. The shadow I'd seen moved closer to the glass, solidifying into a figure. It looked almost human, but something about it was deeply, impossibly wrong. It was as if someone had taken the shape of a person and twisted it in ways a body should never bend. The face, or what I thought was a face, was obscured, but I could see the glint of eyes staring down at me, cold and ancient. The house had been empty for years. I was sure of it. So how? Before I could process what was happening, the front door creaked open with an agonizingly slow groan. The fog spilled out of the doorway like it was alive, curling around my ankles, pulling at me as if it wanted me to go inside. I felt my legs move of their own accord, drawn forward against every instinct screaming at me to run. As I reached the door, I could see the interior was shrouded in shadows, darker than they should have been. The air was thick, heavy, carrying the same sickly scent of decay that filled the barn. I forced myself to step back, fighting the pull of that unnatural fog, and finally managed to turn away. I stumbled across the yard toward my truck, every nerve on fire. Just as I reached the truck door, I heard it. The faint sound of a child's laughter, drifting through the night. My blood turned to ice. There were no children here, no people for miles. But the laughter grew louder, echoing around me as if coming from every direction. It was high-pitched and mocking, like something playing a game I didn't understand. I yanked the door open and threw myself into the driver's seat, fumbling to get the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life, but as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart nearly stopped. Standing at the edge of the field, just barely visible in the dim glow of my taillights, was the figure from the window. It hadn't moved like a person. It was simply there, as if it had materialized out of the fog, its head tilted slowly, its eyes gleaming with something that felt ancient and hungry. The laughter stopped, replaced by a silence that pressed in on me from all sides, thick and suffocating. In that silence, I felt something shift, like the farm itself was waking up, aware of my presence, and it did not want me to leave. I slammed my foot on the gas and tore down the dirt road, not daring to look back. The fog thinned as I sped away, but the feeling of being watched never left. I could still feel those eyes on me, watching from the shadows, following me as I drove mile after mile back toward town. I didn't stop until I reached the highway, the farmhouse far behind me. But as I looked in the rearview mirror one last time, I saw a faint glow on the horizon, a soft pulse of light that looked almost like eyes. And in the pit of my stomach, I knew that whatever I'd disturbed on that land was far from done with me. I've never gone back to the farm. I don't think I could survive it if I did. But sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet, I swear I can still hear that laughter, echoing through the silence, waiting for me to return.